what exactly is your title with Rockford FC?
Okay, yeah, it's been a changing thing. When I first the club got started in 2019, perfect timing right before COVID. We had our first tryouts, I think, in like January, and then second tryouts in March, and so it immediately fell apart a month later. But I was the vice president and kind of co-founder with Samir Romero, who helped found the club with me, and then he, after it was 2021, he led it, and then 2022 he had to step down due to personal issues, so I stepped up as president in 2022, served as president and general manager. I kind of took both titles for 2022 and 2023, and then we're transitioning, so he's president again this next year, and I'm vice president again, because I did not want to, like I said, I'd take the role and keep the club alive, but I am not like a good event planner, which is what a majority of what this kind of thing is. Like, it's being able to plan so many things like that. It's a lot of work for a completely volunteer position with a semi-pro club.
Yeah. So what exactly are your responsibilities? So what does one do to get a what is it required for you to have a semi-pro club? What's the governing body? Like, who do you talk to? Like, how do you set that up?
Yeah, so it is chaos in the United States when it comes to soccer in general, or what the rest of the world calls football. Everyone else in the world, they've got a tiered league system where, like, you got the Premier League in England, you've got the Championship way down, and they've got this set up pyramid where you go all the way down to like Sunday league football, and you're in an established league if you're in this region, that's the league you're in. But you're in the U.S., we got the MLS, and then they don't have much beyond that. It just becomes chaos in the lower ones. So there's a bunch of divisions that are in this, what we call like the fourth or fifth tier, which is like amateur, semi-pro, but like actually organized one, and not like a bunch of dudes that are 45 years old kicking the ball around.
Yeah.
So we're in what's called the Midwest Premier League, which is it was an offshoot of what used to be a national league called the UPSL, and they basically got mad at the National League and created their own league. So we're kind of like the top regional league of that's before you get to pro. But how do you create a team? You literally, it's such a weird process, because you're like, all right, we got to get a coach, you got to get players, and you need to get a place to play. And it sounds fairly simple, but all three of those things can have so many hurdles. Like, you got to convince players that you're worth playing for. You got to convince the coach that you're worth, like you're paying them, but there's worth some time and effort for their effort to get to the games and make sure they're investing in the team. But then also the stadium, because it's so expensive with to rent a field, because you can't just rent it in a league like this. It's not like you can just show up to some random soccer grass soccer field and just show up.
Yeah, you can't do it at the Boys and Girls Club.
Yeah, exactly.
Or anything like that.
And so we have to plan like a turf field that's really high quality and stuff like that, and have a specific stands. We have to stream all of our games. So there's a lot of process.
Wow.
And you're like, okay, I've done that setup, but then you say, how am I going to pay for all this? You need sponsors, you need fans, and you need to be able to sell merchandise. So, when it's just a few of you guys, us running this club, you're a merchandise director, you're a marketing director, you're a social media manager, you're advertising director, you're sponsorship outreach coordinator, you're event planner with making sure you have enough volunteers at the game, you're general manager, making sure you have a roster for the coach to have, and making sure the players have to have there's like a small player fee, but like make sure they actually pay it. And a bunch of 20 to 29-year-old guys, our age, we're notoriously unreliable.
True.
And so try to deal with that. And so it is a lot to juggle. I'm very glad it's only like a 3-month season, goes from May to August, or May to just end of July. And by the end of it, I'm ready to like run away from it, never do it again. So it's good that it takes like I've got another.
It's like giving birth, right? Like, but when you're done with it, all of a sudden you're pining for once again going back into the fray.
You love it, because when you win, I mean, this season I kind of wanted to get away from it because we didn't win a single game, but that's a whole other conversation. But when you do win, you get really excited. Like, we've won a rivalry cup against another local club in the area and stuff like that. And when you get to win those certain things, you see the players, you're like, all right, we put some effort into this, and wow, there's people here, and it's exciting. But when it's not going well, you're like, wow, why am I doing
Yes, exactly.
So how many times a week are you playing games? Is it like hockey or baseball where it's 2 or 3, or once a weekend?
Yeah, so like soccer in general is not to knock those sports, but it's a little bit more physically intensive because it's like an hour and a half straight of running. So most of the guys run like 13 miles in the game, plus they're constantly tackling each other. And soccer does get a reputation for people being wimpy, but like there are serious injuries that happen and stuff like that. So we usually play, it's max 2 times a week. This happens in pro too. You'll play usually once on the weekend, and if you're in another league, a cup, or you have to play another game to fit one in, you might play on like a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday midweek. But even with that, guys get beat up because that's, again, even I referee soccer, and even if I'm doing that many games a week, your legs start getting tired.
So what in your mind would be the end goal of an institution like this, right? Like obviously you guys want to get up to a professional league, right? Like that would be the top thing you guys are shooting for. But what's that process look like? Like what are you guys fighting for any given week?
Survival. At this level, I like to say that the average. I saw some statistics a few years ago. The average team at the 4th, 5th division level survives a year in the United States. That's why it's pure chaos. It is so hard to get a team started and surviving. The fact we've lasted 3 years, and we've had our ups, we've had our downs, but we've lasted 3 years going into our 4th year. I consider that already a success. Short run, I mean, long run, we would love to go pro, but you need millions of dollars to even consider that. And I think our budget's like $35,000 right now. And so
would you say it is a money game primarily? Like you need the money to get the best players that you need to get up to that level?
Well, so in the U.S., I mean, I'll just start out at the basic level. Yeah, you need some money to be able to say, even at this level, you're not paying players at this level, but you need the money to have the best facilities, to have the best coaches, and stuff like that. Like we've practiced on grass fields because we just didn't have money for turf, but we played on turf because we needed to for the league. But you're not going to have the right amount of performance because the guys aren't used to playing on the same type of field, things like that. So money plays a huge effort, but also gets fans. You kind of leads to fans coming out. You can have more money for marketing and all this stuff, and that steamrolls a lot of things. But so you almost need money to make money in it. But also, there's a good metaphor I've heard about sports in general. If you want to be a millionaire, be a billionaire and buy a sports team. So even at the pro levels, most guys are losing money. It is a investment, and a lot of the guys just do it because they love it. It's not about necessarily making money. But the U.S. specifically has a thing called pro league standards that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, against U.S. being weird. But to play in the 2nd or 3rd divisions, or the 1st, which is the MLS, but that's a whole different ball game. You need to have your owners have to have a certain value of their wealth to be able to be even considered pro, and you have to have $50 million of ownership value among your owners to be able to be considered. And I'm like, wow, I my books aren't selling that well right now.
Yeah, I was gonna say you gotta start writing more.
Because it's about quantity. Right?
Brandon Sanderson.
Brandon Sanderson has anything to say about it. It's about quantity.
Sanderson pumps out books like crazy. It's just, that's a lofty goal. Honestly, my goal right now is just to survive, keep building it. Our goal, we're a nonprofit, so our goal really is to be a community club and say we're trying to give something to the community. Rockford has a lot of problems. It's it's a very kind of divided east-west city, with some of the richer part on the east side and poorer part on the west side. Our goal is really to try to cater to both sides of that city and try to unite it and have something that anyone can cheer for. So we have a lot of our guys that are not from the rich, club soccer at the youth level is super money based. So people go, pay thousands of dollars just to play for their 12-year-old kid's soccer game to travel to California for some reason because they think they're being all messy. But these kids that are coming up and playing for us often aren't that. They're the local guys that played for these other, we have the International League, which is very Latino or African-based clubs. And so we often try to cater to that part of the community. And so often the money part's difficult because of that, but we're also trying to be more of a community and give back to the community club. And so being able to say, all right, we need money to be able to give back stuff, but we also need, that money initially to invest to make sure we're giving a good product. Because you don't win on the field, and we struggle with that this year. Nobody wants to show up to a game if you're not going to win anything.
Yeah,
true.
Yeah, people aren't even going to sit through a whole game. If they bought the ticket and they're sitting down, they're not going to sit through the whole game if you're losing. I've been watching a lot of hockey this year. Something we've been talking about on the show quite a bit. But I've been watching a lot of hockey this year, and every blowout it's terrifying watching people like leave the stands. And you can imagine something so intimate like that. And soccer's a lot like this too. You're looking out in the stands. It's like, okay, well, you're not going to come back from being down 3 when you're looking out and you're like, oh, these people don't believe in us. It's the home opener and our stands are empty. It's like, okay, well, we're not coming back after this.
And it's noticeable when what we average, our goal is to get 100 to 200 people per game right now is when we're starting. We can be viable with that. But you miss you lose a couple people at that level. That's noticeable. You lose 20 people out of 100. That's significant amount.
Percentage wise, I mean, I'm no math major, but I think that's 20%. I think that's probably 20% of people.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have Brendan Noble on the show. He decided to deign us with his presence. Hopefully we're not wasting his time too much.
No, not at all.
I'm sorry. I'm talking about
that sounded very facetious.
Yeah, it did. No, I assure you it was not facetious. But we wanted to have you on the show because you're you are a partial manager and co-founder of a soccer team, but you are also a fantasy author, published. And also you have your own publishing house, right?
Yeah, it's like unofficial. Like it's a publishing house right now. It's just me, but my goal is to eventually expand that to more people. Yeah, 815 Publishing is what's called, which is the Rockford area code.
Nice. So I guess the big thing that I want to start off with is just tell the people about your books. What are you writing? And I know that you have a book coming out next month.
Yeah. So I'm currently writing epic fantasy inspired by Slavic mythology. I like to talk about it as kind of Percy Jackson meets The Witcher. So they kind of combining, because a lot of fantasy is often inspired by mythology, whether it's Tolkien, whether it's Percy Jackson with that Greek inspiration. I noticed there was a lot of Greek, Norse, Roman mythology, and there was nothing really including the Polish, Slavic stuff that I kind of stumbled into when my grandparents died near the end of our college and near the end of college. And I was researching more about my Polish heritage because I realized there was very little I knew about it. And I discovered that there's this huge amount of mythology that's not really often even in English. So I tried to take a lot of this. I did a lot of posts what are called Slavic Saturday, where I did posts and videos about mythology and talking about that and try to bring it into English people and try to talk about the connections between different types of mythologies and how Slavs have a huge amount of mythology. I want to then inspire that and make it into a book series. So my series is the Frostmark Chronicles, which begins with a dagger in the winds is the first book. And it will be a 5-book series. The 4th book is coming out next month with which the one you referenced called The Deathless Sons. And it's inspired by the Slavic myths with largely the tale of Marzana and Yarilo, who are two, like a god of winter and with Marzana, and the god of spring kind of with Yarilo, and kind of the tale in Slavic myths of how there's betrayal and everything with the seasons, but how in Slavic mythology and stuff, there's a lot of the gray territory that I try to dive into with the series. And so, it's a series of almost like my love story to Slavic mythology to try to reference my heritage and kind of give it a attention I feel like it didn't have before.
Yeah, the thing that strikes me like right off the bat is that Slavic mythology right now, at least within the greater zeitgeist, is very adult centric, right? Like, The Witcher is a very adult novel series, it's a very adult show, it's a very adult game series, right? And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I would say that a lot of your current work is what I would classify as YA, right, within that general space. And Slavic mythology hasn't really entered to a large degree into that space yet, right? We've got a lot of Egyptian stuff there. We got a lot of Greek, obviously, but Slavic is kind of an untapped thing. So to you, right, like when you see all this other mythological based YA fantasy, right? Did you see that as the fantasy genre is kind of occupied, or this is something that's going to be, new and breathe new life into the YA fantasy genre?
So I think that's a really good question, because you're right that Slavic mythology, the very little amount that is out there is largely a little bit more adult. There's technically the Bear and the Nightingale, I think, is one of the only other ones that.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Yeah,
is YA, but so I wanted to do a bit of both things. When you're writing a book, you also want to be able to say, how am I going to market this? Because you don't want to put, especially with books of this epic fantasy length of like 500 pages, it takes me like a year to publish every one of, or half a year to publish all of them, any of them. So I want to be able to say, it has to be able to hit those tropes that have been set up by fantasy in general and those other mythologies, but also take those new aspects in. So it's a mix of the both, to be able to say what worked really well in those books. And, that's why I read fantasy. I enjoy it, but also to see what works well in other stories, and then be able to say, okay, what can I take and what can I add to it? Because fantasy and books in general and literature is a conversation in some ways, whether it's YA or adult. And I want to say, how can I take some of these myths that are very dark, like the Witcher's monsters and stuff like that. Witcher doesn't go into the gods and stuff, but Slavic mythology is very dark. So I wanted to take some of those and say, how can I put that at that YA level and try to attract that reader and like the characters that are kind of growing into the stories and experiencing the mythology through fresh eyes, kind of like I want the reader to in some ways.
Yeah. So what would you say your primary influences are in that endeavor, right? Because, it's a pretty crowded field. Genre fiction is, period.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that there's a lot of different people, and you talked about this as how do you market it? There's a lot of different people with a lot of different business strategies. There's a lot of different people with a lot of different writing strategies when it comes to doing this. Who are you kind of following after, and partially what inspired you to kind of to dip your foot into this specifically?
Yeah, so in terms of self-publishing, there's not a ton of similar ones I was following directly after. There's a lot of self-published authors I followed for marketing, whether it's Mark Dawson or other ones like that, but they all have different genres. In terms of epic fantasy is a little bit slimmer with self-published, but I followed a lot with the Rick Riordan stuff. That inspired me with mythology. I loved mythology since I read those books as a kid. I said, I want to do something like that, and I found my chance. But I also take one of my biggest influencers is Brandon Sanderson, because he's the biggest one in it, but also I like his style, and I try to say, like, how can I learn from that? But when it comes to marketing in general, self-publishing is a really good community. We often learn from each other. There's a lot of Facebook groups, Reddit groups. We all talk about that and learn from each other. How do you do Facebook marketing, Amazon marketing? How do you get your books out there widely? I've learned a lot lately. I've learned through some friends at local Comic Cons, going to them and how to market and sell at the face to face, because you're right. When a really crowded sphere, it's really hard to tell someone, my book is better than these there's 6 million. That was a couple of years ago, so it's probably much more than that now on Amazon. There were 6 million books on Kindle. That is, not all of them are viable or competition, but even in the epic fantasy sphere where there's a tight competition, the books are long, so it's a commitment to get into one of these books for people. But so I really have learned a lot with it is hard to do it with this inspiration, with this online marketing. So I've learned a lot to do with going to these cons and doing in-person marketing. It's been nice, because if there's 4 or 5 authors at a con, then your competition is 4 or 5 people instead of 6 million.
You're competing with fellow fantasy writers and not like Bigfoot erotica and like self-help books.
Oh, geez. Okay, so you want to talk about that? That is the problem is self-publishing is really big in 2 major genres: thrillers, and romance. And when I say romance, it's that it actually dominates that thing. And these people pump out books. They will write a book a month, and some of them are really weird. I have a group I meet with weekly with some friends who write more like the romantic fantasy, but like normal romance, I would say. And then, but we always come up with stuff, the covers we see in some of these groups, and what to see what people find, and it's like it sells better than me, so I can't even knock it.
It's selling really well. It's about a niche, I think. It's about a niche.
I will say I would like to meet that middle-aged mother that is reading those, because it is to me
it's
insanity, right?
Yes.
No, I will say the thing that, and this is just a little bit off topic, but the thing that those novels have done really well is invest in TikTok marketing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know about this, but like the TikTok book sphere is full of like monster romance novels.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough. And so much so that, it crossed into my sphere of primarily consuming YouTube content, because it's like, what's the deal with all these, tentacle monster romance novels that are popping up on TikTok? So, obviously there's a market there.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know.
And these people are often what we call whale readers, where they just sit there on Kindle Unlimited or other things, and they just read book after book. Some of them are older. A lot of times they are mothers or, retired women that, will just read constantly. And so they sell super well. You're right. TikTok is, and that's one of the ones I haven't gotten into TikTok marketing yet. I did a lot of YouTube videos, which were like more long form content for mythology stuff. But yeah, TikTok's wild. I know my skill set, and I'm not good at doing like the short, like trying to figure out what the trend is and trying to get at. I would rather sit down and write the book. So I'm glad
that's why you hire somebody to do that for you, right?
Well, you got to make enough money first.
True.
So speaking about that, the sitting down and writing the book. So I dabble a little bit in short story stuff and mostly sci-fi fiction stuff, and I haven't published anything, but I've noticed that a lot of the advice on the internet when it comes to writing genre fiction specifically is very systems based. A good example would be like the Sanderson lectures that are on YouTube that he does. Yeah, but like it's very much, he's like, this is the process. There's a process. Figure these things out. This is how world building works. Make sure you have this stuff straight. What exactly is your process? Are you just kind of picking and choosing as you go along? Do you have a lore Bible? Like what do you do to keep things straight, and how do you map out your plots? Because I think for something like epic fantasy, even though you're kind of working off an established mythology, it can be difficult to keep something like that straight.
Yeah, for sure. And there's completely different approaches that people take. Sanderson also does address that well, I think, in his lectures, that there's the base is kind of an axis from what we call the plotters versus pantsers, or the architects versus the gardeners is another one.
Yeah.
But I tend to be, I've been more on what the pantser, discovery writer, gardener side of thing, where we say pantser because you're flying by the seat of your pants while you're writing.
Yeah.
You have no idea what you're doing. But
I thought you were pantsing your audience. You were hitting them with surprises.
Yeah. Well, it surprised me sometimes. I'm like, oh, that character's dead. All right.
Yeah.
So my process has changed a lot throughout, learning to write, because my first series was not fantasy and it was more simple, and this series has been more complicated. And then my next series, which I've actually almost finished writing the next book of, is my first adult epic fantasy, which has more point of view characters. And that one, it was much more of, so I've kind of steadily moved on the scale of pantser and steadily moved more towards outlining and being able to say, all right, I still give myself that freedom that I need to be able to say, I get that creative element while I'm actually doing the work. But I tend to start with the world. A lot of people, they say you tend to start with one of three things: the characters, the plot, or the world. Some people say, here's the plot. I know exactly what's going to happen in the entire story. I don't know who the people are or what world it is, but I know that's the problem, and I know that people are going to solve it in this way. Some people say, I know I've got this girl, this guy, whatever, and I know they want to do this, and kind of what happens. I like to say, all right, I have a world inspiration idea. So this one, it was Slavic mythology. My next one was an emphasis on a lot of political stuff, and I had an idea of different connected realms that is connected to the world of it. But I tend to say, this is the world. What would exist in this world? What is the people who would exist in this world? And then what kind of problems would exist because of that? And that's how my process kind of works. And then I kind of pick someone in that sphere and say, they've got this. Who would they be facing? Who would they come into conflict with? And then I'm starting now to do that more of that outlining and say, okay, over time, what would they try to do? Who needs to do what? And what their goals are? And that outlining process is really, I find it more helpful than I thought it was going to be. I thought it would be annoying, but I only needed to do like a couple of bullet points per chapter. Say, this person needs to do this to eventually get there. I can do whatever I want in that chapter to make it interesting, but they need to learn this thing to be able to solve the problem eventually and stuff like that.
Have you run into any issues with internal logic falling apart?
Yeah.
Because I was actually thinking about this on the way here where I was like, okay, well, if I was to write something that was speculative fiction and I have developed a rule early on, I feel like it'd be easy, especially if you mention it in a throwaway, to break that rule or find yourself kind of falling on your own internal logic. Is that something that you struggle with, or something that you've, not to put you on the spot, but that you've done, that you've made that mistake before?
Yeah. So there is, and this is a big thing with process too. There's kind of, especially it works in Magic. We kind of usually use it in Magic, but it works in everything. There's like hard world building or hard magic systems that are like almost science fiction, where it is, this does this. There is like, you could put a formula to it if you really wanted to. And there's soft magic system, which is Gandalf, where he can do something interesting and apparently save the day. It's not really and there's nothing wrong with that. There's like the wonder that kind of comes with soft magic, and that literal thing that comes with hard magic. We all end up somewhere in between those. And the problem is much more difficult if you're at hard magic, because if you well define that, you better have a good reason for breaking it. Because if you say X does Y, and then all of a sudden X does Z, and you don't tell people why it does that, and there's no reason for it, then you get into like the Deus Ex Machina problem we talked about, where okay, I couldn't write my characters out of the issue I put them into, and so I just made up something to we all end up with it in discovery writing, and that's part of why I've started to outline more. Is sometimes discovery writing you run into that because you didn't outline, so you didn't necessarily know as much what you needed to get there. So what I tend to do is I will just keep writing through it, and then I'll go back and give myself the reason they were able to solve the problem. It's easier with soft magic, and my current one is a little bit more soft magic. They have a set group of powers they can do, but the scaling of it is kind of how powerful they're feeling at the time, or it's more vague, and that's just kind of it's a little bit more classic fantasy with that aspect of it. And then in my next series, it's more hard magic, which I've actually found interesting, because knowing it's hard magic ahead of time is nice, because I can't make up something, so I have to make sure. And if they can't solve it, sometimes they don't, and so there's you challenge yourself as a writer, but you also challenge the characters, and you allow the story to take a different way of taking place. If you say, I have these limitations, I'm sticking to them. Because you break it, sometimes it just comes to simplicity. And sometimes readers like it when things don't necessarily work out. But you can run into that.
That reminds me a lot of developing, because I've watched a lot of videos on how this is going to sound kind of silly, but how mangaka, guys who draw manga, how they develop power systems, because they emphasize hard stuff primarily so that they can create moments of discovery. Where you can't have a loophole unless there's a loop, unless there's something that you need to get around. And the more rules that you kind of put in place, the more creative you can work within those spaces.
I would say a great example of that would be JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, where Araki kind of just creates a situation where it's like, who knows how one could overcome the situation, and then he has to, one of the pleasures of reading something like that or watching, say, it in an anime form is like, how did they mentally gymnastics their way through that situation, right? As an author, it's like, I mean, obviously at the moment you're thinking the character did that. Like, I can't believe that character was able to overcome the situation. But really at its core, it's the author was able to see the barrier and get around it. Right. Which I always think is very fun.
Yes.
It's one of the benefits of having a hard system.
Yeah. That is a good benefit of it.
Yeah. So have you have you struggled at all in this new series that you're working on with that? Have you hit any barriers where you've felt like you've written yourself, you have to do some extra work to write yourself out of such a corner?
Are you saying for the next series with the hard magic one?
For the next, yeah.
Well, I would say writing the outline really helped avoid that. It did come with, but there's also the thing of, I will go, in the more soft magic, I'd say, well, the guy could like throw a lightning bolt out of his hand and like kill the guy. But I'm like, this guy doesn't, like, he's got magic that can force someone to tell the truth or something like that, but he almost refuses to use it. And so that's not really useful in a combat situation or something like that. And so, it's great because authors, you think of that creativity and you're like, wow, the author was so creative. But we do have that advantage, one of time. Like, we can take the time to think about the problem and unwind it and say, like, okay, what we also have the advantage of retroactively going back and changing something to make sure that it's set up to, like, because there are sometimes problems, but I try not to be afraid of as an author to say, I put them in an unwinnable situation, or they put themselves in an unwinnable situation. People often say, oh, no, you write the characters, but in reality, a character should follow their intentions, and sometimes their plot ends up in a point that they can't solve. That can end up with them failing or dying, and if it happens, I tend to try to let it happen, because if it's a choice between breaking the system and it not working then and becoming a logical issue, then it's not meant for the system and it's not meant for the world. But there are also those times where you need to be able to come to that creative brilliance. And it's been fun because there are some times where this series it kind of jumps to feeling a little bit more low fantasy and feeling a bit more high fantasy because it's based on like a technology level of like the early 1800s. So they've got guns and they've got basic medicine and stuff like that, but you run into some of these things where you're like, okay, it doesn't feel all that magical, and then like boom, they're interacting with another realm or something like that, or a different, like, I don't want to spoil things, but like spirits, the spirit realm basically is what this is the basis of, and they're interacting with these spirits and trying to interact with how they can defeat them, but they don't know how. And so being able to say like those elements of discovery is fun, because even in a hard magic system, you could be not breaking your system because you know that the hard magic allows for this already because you've written it and in your outlines and things like that. The characters don't, and the readers don't. So your job is then to guide the reader and guide the characters into the discovery of the thing that they have to discover in the already established system that they don't think is established but is, and then address that issue. But it is a problem, and I go back and sometimes change things because you do that, and I've killed characters because of that.
You gotta love it. You got the whole picture in front of you, and you can go back 300 pages and be like, actually, it would be better if that man never existed.
Well, and I had some struggles with this with Frostmark Chronicles a bit, with even with the soft thing and everything like that, is especially with short stories are nice because you can kind of keep it focused and there's not as many threads that are going all over the place. But I'm bad at writing short stories. I start writing a short story, it ends up 300 pages. It just inevitably happens. But I was editing, so part of why I'm writing the next series right now before I write the next book, the final book for the Frostmark Chronicles, because every time I was writing the next book in the series and then having people read the last book and then edit it, I changed something significant enough where I had to scrap a significant amount of what I'd written, because there's so many threads. And for consistency, if, for example, one character is in a different spot, or they don't get a certain magic, or they die, or they're not in this place, you can lose 40,000 words of writing, which is a third of a book. And I have, because all this stuff is so interconnected. And so there are so many systems that work in epic fantasy. It's both the fun and the challenge of it, because the magic has to work with the world, and it has to work with the characters, and it has to work with the plot. And if one of those things just shifts slightly while you're working on it. And so, if I go back 300 pages, I have to be careful, because sometimes you're like, all right, I cut that thread, but that thread needs to reconnect up there somewhere for one of the plots. And so can someone else fill that role? can a certain thing appear that makes that happen? Well, how do I connect those things? Or do I have to figure out a way to completely cut the thread and then you end up with unwinding it? So that's why outlines have been nice for making sure that I'm consistently making sure I'm on the same path. And so I know where the threads are going originally, so I don't cut them and end up with those.
Do you have somebody, say an editing person, looking at the outline so that you have that same perspective at a macro level before you get into the more detailed version, or do you take that and then start writing from it and then have an editor come in and look at it?
Yeah, so I don't have anyone edit the outline because it is a big ball of wibbly wobbly timey-wimey stuff. I mean, it's not all that. It'd be hard for them to get the understanding of the plot just from that. And often, you know this. You guys sit around, you chat about a book idea or story idea you come up with or whatever, and then it can sound terrible or sound great just based off of a few plot points. But how it comes out is really what matters in the end. And so, no, I don't have anyone look at it, but I do, I have beta readers, alpha readers, everything like that at the end, editors that kind of look at it. And then I have people that look at it from more of the top level view and the plot. And then I have people that, do the more proofreading edits. But, yeah, I would say it's a learning over time, because at the start, I kind of had no idea what I was doing back in 2018 when I first got started writing. And now I've learned the process of saying, I know what a kind of a good story looks like, having read so enough and watched enough. 3-act structure, all the other different, systems are out there. And even if you don't follow one directly, what you need to do to kind of get towards a certain plot point, to get towards the climax and everything like that. And so I don't necessarily need someone to look at the outline. I might talk to people and say, like, does this idea sound interesting to you? But a lot of the times I don't care if the idea is interesting to me. I'm going to just go with it anyway. There's a thing where people like to say, write what you want to write, but more often you should write what you want to read. So I tend to say, like, I would like to read this story, because if I read epic fantasy and I would like to read this, there's probably someone else out there that would like to read this.
So let's talk a little bit. You talked a bit about your early writing, right? You didn't really know how this process sort of actually came about. The only piece of Brendan Noble fiction I have ever read is The Fractured Prism, the first in the Prison Files. So I wanted to ask you a bit about, because obviously you're very focused right now on fantasy specifically, right? Your first novel, The Fractured Prism, was a dystopian novel, right? What sort of brought about a shift from that sort of dystopian sci-fi novel into the fantasy, right? Like, was that your true first love? Like, where did that motivation come from?
I think it was largely, I've always been a fan of epic fantasy. I think it's more the genre I love. And I was interested in dystopian, and I was really into politics at the time. And I think I got that series out of my system, and I said, great, I did that. And I'm done with it. It was kind of like, and so I'm glad I did dystopian is a bit more of a simpler genre, because it was alt history in present time, but it doesn't have all these complex magic systems. The world building's a little bit more simpler and stuff like that. And so, I started out with that just because it was what I was interested in. I wanted to write a dystopian one because I loved Hunger Games and Divergent and stuff like that. And I said, all right, maybe I can do something off that and do a story just inspired by it. I didn't really know where I was going with it. I kind of did. Andrea had inspired me to do National Novel Writing Month in November in 2018, which is just coming up too. And the goal is to write a book a month. And so I was like, all right, I'll try it. I was sitting in Grand Rapids, kind of bored, and I decided to do it. And The Fractured Prism came out of that. It had its good parts, it had its faults, and it's funny because you say that's the only one you read, and I cringe because as much as people say, I've heard good things, reviews about it and stuff like that, but I legitimately cannot go back, and I struggle to read some of my older books because I've grown so much as an author. Like I can't. I legitimately have to put the book down at a certain point. But yeah, I think I will be staying in fantasy. It's my love of the genre. Having magic and stuff is stuff on it. And fantasy is such a wide, broad genre that you can, like, the political elements that I still really enjoy are brought into, especially this next series I'm working on, where it's kind of Game of Thrones style, type of politics, where it's a little gritty, and stuff like that, without all the unnecessary sex and stuff in it. But sorry, my cat's tail might appear.
It's okay.
It's all good. We'll put them in the featuring Brenda Noble and also Brenda Noble's cat.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a good chance a cat was going to show up in a podcast.
Yeah.
She hears me talking and she's like, "You're talking to me."
Yeah.
It's been a kind of an evolving taste thing of also, like, I wrote that right after graduated college, and so college, you're reading a lot of what you're required to read, and it's often you don't have as much time to do what you want to. So I hadn't read a ton of stuff since like 2014, and I had read a lot of dystopian stuff at the end of it. So that's kind of what I'd read a lot at the time. I was into it. I kept doing it, and then my genre really shifted more into both YA and adult fantasy, and it's really shifted more towards adult fantasy as I get older, just because of age and being able to relate to the story and stuff. And so I think that's just natural growth of my taste and what I'm into as a reader. And what I want to read is what I want to write, because I'm going to have to read the book 50 times before I put it out there.
Yeah. So to get down to some of the nittier gritty here.
The nittier grittier.
Yeah. Actually writing.
Yeah.
Right. So you say you have this inspiration. Andreas tells you, "Hey, you should write, this, you should do this challenge in 2018. Two questions, I guess. This is kind of a tandem thing. The first is, what is your actual writing process like? How do you find the discipline to do it? How do you make this a priority in your life? Because I know at this point it's like self-continuing, because, you're a public author and you have a series, so that's going to force you to kind of keep doing it.
Right.
But like, how did you sit down and write that first book, drive yourself to do it? And then also, how did you have, where did you find the confidence to say to yourself, this is something that people should read, or that people should read me?
And not only that, but you did finish your first series, right? Like, regardless of how, fondly you look back on the Prism Files, you finished the trilogy, right? Like, you did it from beginning to end. Where did you find that motivation?
It wasn't a trilogy. There was 4 books.
Was there 4?
Yeah,
Sorry.
Quadrilogy.
Yeah.
My apologies.
No, you're fine. No, that's a really good question. So discipline is such a huge part of being able to be an author, because especially when you write books the length of the ones I write, it was easier with Prism Files and stuff to like half the length of what I write now. But sitting down and getting in front of a computer and just typing the first part is always hard when you're looking at a blank screen and trying to type something. That's always difficult. But inspiration only goes so far. That's a big thing authors always talk about, is even if you're not inspired, you need to sit down and write the book if you want it to ever be finished. Because, writing block does happen, and sometimes you just have to write through it. I have a bit of ADHD element to it, where I'll get distracted super easily and stuff. So if I'm on, I have that hyper focus, and I can write 3,000 words in 2 hours, and which is like almost a chapter and a half. So I can knock out a lot really quickly. Other times I might get 200 words done in an hour. And so I try to equal that out with, I learned this actually from another self-published fantasy author who's gotten really big right now, Ryan Cahill, who said that, you get one of those production apps on your phone where it says, you can't look at anything, and you time it for 30 minutes and write for 30 minutes and just push through for 30 minutes, knowing that you're going to get a break at the end of that 30 minutes. And so you don't get that burnout of saying, "Oh, I'm tired, I want to stop." And so you write for 30 minutes, you take a break for 15 minutes, and if you want to keep writing, go keep writing again, and keep doing that until you're like, "I would like to do something else," or "I have to do something else." Because being an adult is hard, because I have a full-time job. I've got Andrea, I've got a lot of other things, a house to take care of and stuff like that. So making the time is really difficult, but I think scheduling it and doing those, saying if this is a big thing I try to schedule, is say, I have this time allotted tonight to write, and I'm going to write in that time. I'm going to spend that 30 minutes, take a break, 30 minutes until I run out of time. And I think that knowing that you're going to get a break, knowing you can get up and do the things you need to do, then get down and do it is, it's hard, but I enjoy the process. It's just, there are certain aspects, and like I say, when you get into those knots and you're trying to untie the knots, they can be so hard, and you get this blockage in your brain. You're like, I don't want to do it because I don't want to. It's work to untie, but then you get the reward in the end. But I also try to make sure, it's a cliche, but when I'm in the shower, I'm thinking about the books and stuff like that. So I try to know what I'm going to write when I sit down. That usually helps a lot. Say, like, I know at least what the next couple pages look like. So I get down and get that, and then you just kind of get momentum. It's like running. I ran cross country back in the day. It's really hard to start running because you don't want to run because running sucks. But once you run a mile, you either are dead or you can keep going a bit further depending on your endurance. Yep. And it's the same thing with writing. You write a couple pages and you're like, okay, how am I feeling? Can I keep doing this? How am I going? And just judge where you're at and keep going a bit. Everyone writes at different paces, though. I write, I try to make sure I do at least 1,000 words a day. That way I get about 2 books done a year. Other authors who are full-time aim for more like 2,000. But obviously when you have your full work schedule to be able to write or market, that is a lot more time to be able to do that. So, I tend to, put my headphones on. I can't listen to anything with lyrics because it gets distracting. So I put, I have a writing playlist of 1,000 songs that I just have on shuffle. That's just classical scorecore, stuff like that, that I can focus with. I just try to write. And that's the process. I mean, and then from there, you write the book, and then you kind of go back and read it and just do a pass through plot-wise and say, all right, is this any good? Because we all get to a point in the book writing it. There's a couple pages. You're like, this is the best idea I've ever had. It's going to be the best thing ever. You get to the middle of the book. You think you're the worst author ever. Why am I doing this? I want to give up being an author. You get to the end of it, and you're like, this is really good. I just wrote the best climax ever. And then you get to the end, like, all right, I had a lot of feelings when I wrote this book. Let me read through it and see kind of how it, went. And then you have to do, your initial proofread edits and everything like that afterwards. And then you send it out to the other people. And you asked about, I think, how I decided I should send this to other people. I think there's an aspect of, or how I decided other people should read this. There's an aspect of, Andrea will tell me if something sucks. It's great to have a significant other that will tell you when you're doing fantastic, and they'll give you all the praise for it and encouragement. But they'll also tell you this isn't very good and you need to keep working on it. And she won't tell me it absolutely sucks, but she'll tell me if, it wasn't good enough. And we went through some phases of that with the Prism Files, of making sure it was up to where it needs to be. Because, anyone's first book, you're going to struggle with the first draft and everything like that. But, when it got her approval, I was like, great. Well, I'll show it to some other people. Like Ross Hatley's been really good from Hills has been great for it. And some other people that have been beta readers for me through a long time have been able to give good feedback. And, if you get enough people to say this is good, then you're like, okay, I've got at least, 5 or 6 people here that have read it multiple times or edited it and stuff like that and said it's worth reading. Then put it out there and you see how it goes. And if more people say it, you're like, great, maybe I'm not terrible at this. And
do you have a designated hater? Somebody in your retinue who you're like, this person's going to be the least charitable to me, because I feel like that could be valuable, but I'm just curious. Do you have somebody there?
I don't have a designated hater, but I have some beta readers that will that will be more honest with me of this part needs to change. And actually, Andrea's really good at that. That's why she's kind of one of my first readers with it, because she'll tell me she's legitimately in the Prism Files. There's a part where she said she's literally threw down the book and she's like, change it. It was a description of a crown and she hated it, and so I was like, okay. But and then there's Ross Hatley will literally call me up and say we got to talk about this. And so we had a moment with that. I think it was in the second book of the Frostmark Chronicles, and I don't have any designated haters likely, because I feel like if you don't enjoy reading someone's books, you probably wouldn't keep beta reading.
It's true. That is a very reasonable criticism.
Exactly.
So there are people. I've had people read. I luckily Frostmark Chronicles had really good reviews. But I had one lady, 1-star or 2-star first book in the Prison Files, and said like it's terrible, not worth reading, yada yada yada. And then read the second one, bought the second one, so and then read it, and then she said the same thing about the second one, like not any better. And I said, you can buy the third one. I'll take the 2-star review for give me money.
Yeah,
obviously he paid for it.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny. Yeah, I imagine at your level right now, a lot of the people who read your work are either people or people who are really into the genre. Is that accurate?
So, I mean, if you look at Dagger in the Winds, the first book right now, I've done pretty good with getting a lot of reviews on. I have like 167 reviews now on Amazon and 122 on Goodreads. So I'm beyond the point where I know most of the people. Beta readers are people I've stumbled into some people that enjoyed my book and said, "Hey, can I be your beta reader?" I said, "You want to read my books and give me feedback for free, which I would normally have to spend a lot of money before?" Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I run into that, and so it's good because I give out that first book in Frostmark Chronicles for free. So if anyone listening to this wants to listen to or read A Dagger in the Winds, it's free in ebook form. So and that's been nice because I mean I've had probably 10,000 downloads or something like that at least on that book, and you get a lot of people who enjoy it and reach out, and you have people that don't read it, but and then the occasional people that don't like it, but overall, yeah, most of the people, I've kind of expanded. I'm in that weird middle group where you're not quite the tiny author that is just getting started, and you're not quite big and making like enough money to be full time. So it's a difficult phase to be in because all the phases have their own difficulties, but it's like I know how to market to get to the point I'm at. It's hard to market to go further. Kind of like with the Rockford FC thing I was talking about, where you need to spend money to make money. And then, sometimes book marketing is so weird. It's hard to know, like, it's worked, the book blurb, like the page on Amazon or what's on the back of the book has worked so well, and the covers work so well, but you don't know, all right, I'm not making as much as the other person did if they did the same strategy as me. Is this worth pushing further on? Is it not?
Yeah.
So, it's expanding, and that's why it's fun with every book I put out is, it's more readers, and yeah, it's fun. And I put it out because I think too, like with the question earlier, I feel like if I didn't put it out, I would feel like I just wasted my time. Like you spent that much time writing it. At that point, even if no one reads it or a few people read it and don't like it, like it's not the end of the world. Like, and I write because I enjoy it for a lot of the time. I do put those pre-orders up because it's also pressure on myself to say, I need to get it out by this point because otherwise I will dilly-dally a bit. So, but yeah, it's an interesting process.
Yeah, I actually am curious about drop-off because I imagine it's kind of difficult writing a series, especially 4 or 5 books, because you're in a situation where, the first book is free, a lot of people are reading it, but it's a commitment to make it all the way through a series.
Yeah.
Is it tough kind of sitting down and writing the 5th book in a series, knowing that less and less people are going to be interacting with it?
Yeah, and especially if there's a huge lag in terms of like people who are still buying, because you still market the first book. Like that's the really hard thing about writing the 4th book. I'm marketing it, but I'm really just marketing the first book. You can't just jump into the 4th book. It would be absolutely confusing. And so there is that hard thing, but the drop-off is significant with especially first books to second books. It's highly dependent on price points and things like that. So like if I sell my ebooks for $4.99, $2.99, $3.99, you change prices around. But if they're around the same price, your goal is to kind of have like a 25% to 50% read through from first book to second book, or give or take. We all have our different price points that you make profit on. And then usually the read through gets really high beyond there. Someone's read the second book. They've already read 1,000 pages in my writing, and so they don't hate me by then. So they should probably keep reading. So I really like to watch the sales of that second and third book, and that kind of gives me the idea of, how the rest of the series is going to go. But with a free first book, there are a lot of people who just download a ton of books on their Kindle and don't read through, or eventually might get to it. And so like read through on that like 0.1 to 0.5%, which is really disheartening when you get like 10,000 downloads on a first book and you're like, wow, I got like 10 people to buy in the like couple months after that, or something like that after that, and you're like to read the second book. And so it's a process, and sometimes I dabble with right now that free marketing of the first book. I really wanted to I wanted to get my book in front of as many people as possible with this one and say, I want as many people as possible to read this and continue to read on. And that was my goal because it was my first fantasy series. And we'll see marketing changes and stuff like that going forward. But it is hard when you're writing the fourth and fifth books in the series because you're like, how many people are going to read this? Because people are still taking time to read from the second or third book because I've been publishing 2 books in a series a year. It's 3 books in a series a year. And sometimes people aren't the quickest readers, especially with how long these books are. So maybe it'll be a little bit easier when I'm switching back and forth from the series that I'm doing now to avoid those editing issues we talked about earlier. Give people, a year to read it. Hopefully, it'll give them more time to want the next one.
There you go. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for talking us through, or bringing us through your process in regards to writing here. For those that are listening, this is the Monomaniacs podcast. If you guys enjoyed what you heard today, enjoyed our interview with Brendan, then please like and subscribe. Hit that freaking bell button, dude. Just freaking smack it, dude. I have no idea what the bell button does.
I've notifications.
I've heard that it's important.
Yeah, it's notifications.
I've heard people are always telling me to hit that bell button. I don't know much about it. That being said, we want to throw out a quick thank you to all our patrons for supporting the show. We could not do this without you. Patreon's /Monomaniacs pod if you guys are interested. Want to thank our top tier patrons first and foremost, that being Sammy Roberts, Luke Robson, Joe Papalardo, and Zach and Amber Strehle. We could not do this without you guys, and you help make this possible and be able to bring on folks like Brendan to talk about their life's work, what they're interested in right now. And that's the primary goal here. So Brendan, before we wrap up the main episode, I want to first hit up the fact that we do have a Patreon exclusive post show. So all those that are interested, you can hop onto our Patreon to see that. Well, there is a fee though. So, that's where, things are going to get a little bit, crazy.
I actually have some questions specifically for the Patreon.
Yeah, specific Patreon related questions. That might be a little bit more on the wild side. I don't know. I don't know what his questions are.
I'm just going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. That's all.
That being said, if you guys are interested in that, you can go on to that Patreon. You can find the episode there. Brendan, what should the people be looking out for? I know that you've got your new series coming up. You've got your next book in the series that you're currently working on. What's going on in your life?
Yeah, so, if people want to keep updated with me, first of all, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Brendan Noble, author, is usually the best thing you can search, and I'll come up. I usually post a lot of updates on there about what I'm doing and what I'm working on. If you want to follow me right now, Dagger in the Winds is a great way to get started. If you do ebooks, it's free. Download it. You can decide if you love it or hate it. It's okay. If you hate it, don't leave a review. If you love it, leave a review. I wasn't going to say.
It has to be at least above 3.5 stars.
I usually say I'll take 3 and up.
Okay.
Anything below that, you can keep your opinion to yourself. What was I going to say? But coming up, the Deathless Sons is coming out, book 4. That's what I'm working on a lot right now. And Crimson Court is the name of the next series. The first book in the Realm Reachers is coming out in April of next year. If you're in the Midwest, I'm also going to a bunch of Comic-Cons, and you can keep updated on my Facebook and Instagram if you want to see me at a Comic-Con and chat about mythology or books. So
sweet, awesome. Well, thank you again so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
We will see you all in the Patreon. Bye. Peace.